it's important to realize that there never was nothing. We're not talking about something out of nothing. In fact, the spirituality, the spiritual tradition that we refer to as Hinduism, is actually called Sanatan Dharma, which literally means an eternal way of life, no beginning, no end, that which always existed. And so if there was an always existing Dharma, well, of course, there was an always existing divine. The divine didn't suddenly come into being. What it's more like is it's not something out of nothing, but it's many out of one. That's what happened. So it wasn't there was nothing and then suddenly there is something, but there was an undivided oneness. Call it God, call it the divine, call it the supreme reality, call it truth, call it love. Whatever word we use, it doesn't matter. And then here we are, feeling like these very separate, individual, multiple beings, being told that our journey, our path is to go back to God. And then, of course, the question arises, well, how did we come out of God to begin with? If it's all about going back, how did that one become many? And again, without getting lost in too much of the philosophy, the most beautiful and deeply personally applicable explanation for that I've ever heard, and the one that feels the most right in my own heart, my own experience, is First of all, we never did become many. That this illusion of separation is just an illusion, and that we actually are still part of the one. It's just our ignorance that makes us think we are separate. This ignorance that identifies as the body rather than identifying as soul. The ignorance that identifies as form instead of content. And so that's one important piece, is the one never did become many. There is only one. We are all just like waves on an infinite ocean. But even as a waveform, we never stop being ocean. So we are all just momentary forms of an infinite reality. And you can have an experience of that if you go deeply into meditation. You can sometimes touch that awareness of just beingness, just isness, not is happiness, not is peacefulness, not is even enlightenmentness, but just isness. So that's one important piece, is the one never really did become the many. The many is that illusion. And the essential and highest and most beautiful truth is to realize that you never actually did become separate from God. But that even in this individual form, you are God, like a wave is still ocean. Whether it's a 30-foot tsunami or a 2-inch little ripple, either way, they're still ocean. In the same way, whether we are a tiny baby, a big adult, whatever we may be, whatever the size or shape or color of our physical bodies may be, we're actually still divine. That's the truth of who we are, the core of who we are. And then there's this other piece, which says, well, okay, so yes, we know that's true. And we also know that we have these individual experiences that aren't an illusion. This experience of being an individual heart, an individual human existence with its own individual recipe of all sorts of the stuff that makes us human. And so then, why did that one become many? And as I was saying, the only explanation that I've ever heard that feels in my personal heart like, yeah, is to experience the coming back together. And so think about it. To becoming one is beautiful, is extraordinary. Think about how beautiful an embrace with a loved one is. Think about how beautiful simply loving is, regardless of whom or what you love, but just the act of loving. But in order to love, there requires an other. It's very, very difficult to simply go within and love the undivided, unformed, ununique, pure consciousness of who you are. That's a very difficult actual experience to have. You can have an experience of touching it, of experiencing it, but then how to love it. If you're going to love, there needs to be the one who loves, and then there's the one who you love, and then there's this act of loving. So there's kind of three parts. There's me, the lover. There's the other being, a human being, a tree, a river, an animal. A human being living or having passed on, either way, whatever it may be that I love. But the beloved. And then there's this experience of love between us. Three pieces. And what I've heard is that the divine, in order to experience that act of love, that many becoming one, went from one into many. And the reason that this makes sense to me is if you think about your own relationships, and this tends to happen mostly in romantic relationships more than just friends or siblings or family members, but think about being in a relationship with someone in which it's nice, you love each other, things are going well, but maybe it starts to feel a little bit boring. What do? Unconsciously. Most of us don't wake up in the morning and say, I know I'm going to pick a fight. But unconsciously, a lot of us stir up drama in our relationships just for the experience of bringing that drama to a peak. You've got a fight. And then when you have a fight, what that fight is one, like the two of you had been one in this relationship, but that got boring. And so then one of you stirred something up so that one would become two. Here you are in a fight. And then what do you get when you fight? Well, eventually you get to make up, right? And the two become one again. And that act of making up, that act of again coming back together, is just the spark, the catalyst that a lot of times we think our relationships need. And so if you really go within and you're really honest and you look at relationships that you've had, chances are you'll be able to identify either you or the other one, or maybe together. Again, unconsciously, we don't wake up and decide we're going to do it, but it just happens that we create this conflict because making up feels so good. Making up in many ways feels better than just, yeah, everything's fine. There's something about the juiciness of making up after you've been in a fight that seems to carry more joy for a lot of us than just the continual, yeah, things are going fine. And so when I think about that, the idea that the divine also wanted to experience that coming back together, even though he, she, it, they, however we conceive of the divine, of course knew it's all one. It's never been anything but one. But just on the surface layer, that experience of coming back together is so beautiful. And that's why the one created the many with the loss of memory that we were part of the one, so that we, remember we are divine on the inside, so that we as divinity, as we remember we are divine, are coming back together. And that experience of coming back together being so beautiful. So what that means for us is, regardless of where you are in your spiritual journey, ask yourself, how can I experience that joy, that bliss of coming back to the truth of who I am? Okay, maybe I've forgotten. Maybe I have forgotten for every moment of the 25 or 35 or 65 years of my life. No problem. Pujya Swamiji always says, whenever you wake up, it's morning. Right now, can you give yourself that opportunity to experience coming back together? Back to your heart, back to your truth, back to that place of love and expansion and perfection within the self. Can you come back to that? And that's what our spiritual practice is about.